again. I'm Kenrick Ross. I am the founder of Urban+Out, in case you didn't see me earlier. So the reason why we're doing this conversation is because we have different aspects of when we discuss the Caribbean. But very often, LGBT people are left out of it, of the discussion. And what has happened in the last couple of years is that we're starting to have a conversation both inside the Caribbean and in its diaspora communities about LGBT rights. I think there's always been talk in the Caribbean from the reggae stars and the pulpit and governments and things like that about LGBT issues, but it's usually been one-sided. We're finally having civil society organizations. We're having a conversation, particularly in the countries that are represented here today. And the other reason why we chose to have certain focusing on what we'll call the Commonwealth Caribbean, or the Anglophone Caribbean, as opposed to general Caribbean, is the Caribbean is a very large and diverse place, as you saw in the tour. And cultural competence is very, very important in this conversation. So I wanted to make sure that what we're saying and what you are receiving as information is at a level of authenticity and intimacy, and we have people who work day in and day out with these issues, and that's very hard to do with 24 countries at one given time. So this is the second conversation we're having. The first one we had was on Haiti, on what happened to LGBT people after the earthquake, and later on this year we're going to have a conversation on Cuba. So we're looking at different parts of the Caribbean going forward. And finally, the reason why we wanted to have folks speak and have a conversation with people who work in this area is that too often we read reports. 10 years ago, I was part of a volunteering organization that did a report that sort of distributed a report called Hate to Death that was done by Human Rights Watch. And it was a report that was done in Jamaica. And if you read it, and I'll post it on the Facebook, it is a critical piece of reading for what is happening in the Caribbean. And it was called Hated to Death, and on it was the picture of a man whose head was healing from being hit several times with a cutlass or machete because he was gay. And when we did that panel discussion in New York, we didn't have anybody from the Caribbean to speak. We didn't have many people in the audience from the Caribbean. And I was told at that time is that we didn't have activists. We didn't have people to speak. And when I started putting together this panel, I was told the same thing by several organizations, that we didn't have people who are working these issues in the Caribbean. But we do. They're here. And on the screen. So that is why we have turned to people who work day in and day out with these issues, both in the Caribbean and in the diaspora communities, particularly in New York. So I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to turn it over to our panelists, and I'll